All right, this is Jack Donovan, and you are listening to or watching Pater, the Journal of Solar Culture. And I'm here, as always, with C.B. Robertson, author of many fine books. I can't list them all right now. But today, we were talking about this the other day and trying to figure out what to talk about, and we decided to call it kind of as a joke, but kind of not, zoological humanism. And what this discussion really started as for me is back, and you can find this podcast on our site or in our streams. Back when we all got together in Nevada and did a fire ritual there, we did a live podcast in which we talked about the nature of goodness. And we kind of determined that you really can't always determine what good is. Because there is a lot of specificity. Well, I'm not even going to try and say that again. There is a lot of, it's specific to different tribes, to cultures, to ideologies. They all determine their own level of good. And the idea of an objective good is kind of a difficult thing to chase. And no one really ever finds it. But one thing that I said at that time was that if there was going to be a universal good for humans, because that's who we're talking about, then it would probably be to perpetuate the survival of the human race. And that bad would be making us extinct. I think from the most basic standpoint, for us, good would be to continue. Beyond all that, we can fight the rest of it out forever, which is exactly what humans would do. But, and that brought us around to some of the conversations that are happening right now. I think that if you would have asked anyone 200 years ago if you think that humans should survive on the earth, they would say yes. And that would be in general agreement. But today, there's this creeping nihilism in which there are a lot of people that just don't, for whatever reason, there's environmentalists who don't think we deserve to be on this earth and we should let the animals take it back over because we're gross and they're good. And of course, we would be the only ones who would be able to evaluate that, of course. And then there's all kinds of people now, especially this nihilism that turns into transhumanism, which is not unrelated to this kind of afterlife seeking that we have in this kind of despiser of the body and people who are focused on the afterlife because they're looking to transcend humanity too. And that's their ultimate goal, is to transcend humanity. But what we have now is people like AI accelerationists who are actually cheering on the end of the human race because they think the singularity is going to replace us. And it's going to be so much better that we're going to be obsolete. And I've always likened them to Cthulhu cultists in the sense of like they just want to be eaten last. They want the thing to destroy everyone, but they want to be eaten last. And I've kind of thrown out that if there was such a thing as evil, if the good is for the human race to survive, and there's such a thing as evil that's universal to all mankind, it would be the survival of mankind. And evil would be these people who want us to die. I feel that's reasonable. I think that's a reasonable thing to say. But a lot of people don't seem to have a problem with it. There's a lot of transhumanism out there that they're like, oh yes, the singularity will replace us. It's going to be good. It's been what every sci-fi dystopian movie has been about for the past however many years. But there are still a lot of people who are like, no, that's fine. We probably deserve it or whatever. So we got to talking about this, and I was like, we need to take a pro-human position. Like, what is a pro-human position? And so we started to look into, obviously then you get humanism, all these things that sound like they should be pro-human positions. But in fact, if you dig into the definitions of them, they are not necessarily that. Do you want to take it from there as to what you found as far as the definitions of humanism, which sounds like it would be a good idea, but maybe isn't?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you humanism goes back quite a ways. There's some people who take it all the way back to like Cicero and Rome, but really it came out of the Enlightenment. It was Enlightenment thinkers who really began talking about it, humanism, and we saw a sort of resurgence in its use from Jean-Paul Sartre, the Marxist existentialist. And I've been going down a Heidegger rabbit hole recently. And it's funny because
Have you ever read that play? I mean, obviously, you wrote several plays, but you ever read No Exit?
no, I got,
Hell is Other People is basically what
yeah,
it kind of folds nicely in the discussion.
well,
The theme of it is that hell is actually other people.
I read a few pages of Nausea like a decade ago, and I didn't hate it, but I wasn't enchanted by it either.
Sure.
And the more I've learned about Sartre, the more I'm like, nah. Um, the real impressive French existentialist was Camus, the only one who didn't go Marxist. But I the Heidegger piece I've been diving into is I forget the title precisely. It was like Letter on the Question of Humanism or Letter on Humanism or something. And it wasn't directly a response to Jean-Paul Sartre, but it was kind of a response because Heidegger had been being called an existentialist as a note of praise by these French existentialists like Sartre, who wrote a book called Existentialism is a Humanism. And Heidegger very much rejected the label. He said, I'm not an existentialist. I'm doing phenomenology here. I'm trying to get into the experience of being so that eventually someday we can do proper ontology, which is what philosophy has to get back to. And he very much rejected this label of humanism. And one of the lines from his work was, humans are not lords of the earth. We're shepherds. And he was trying to say we do guide things. We do have some role to play, but we're not absolute masters. We have inherited certain things. We've inherited a certain nature. We've inherited a history, a culture. We've inherited language and stories, and we can guide things and shape things, but we're not absolute masters over this in the way that existentialists, who are trying to be humanists and put humans at the center, like Sartre and like these others, say it is our responsibility to take control of our own lives, which is like I'm on board with that to a degree. It's the degree that is the problem. Is they take an absolutist and a tacitly blank slatist view of the human animal in how much responsibility humans have for our direction and path. And it's um, the problem, I think, is in the extremity of the position. And so to me, humanism, the label human, like you could have the same debate about feminism. There's many different people who have many different debates about the real meaning of feminism and so forth. But at the end of the day, it's about women. It's about centering our focus on women. And with humanism, it's about centering our focus on humans, which on the one hand is kind of nice. And to your point about the nihilism, it does seem like a problem that we're running into, especially with the ecological worried folks, is that they have so objective of a notion of what good. I think we talked about this in the podcast with Dustin too.
Mm-hmm.
People who have so objective of a view of good that our subjective interests are of no concern. And I think we had talked, contrasting, borrowing from the holy nihilism idea, where you have a singular point of evil that is all rejecting. And then from there are diverging branches of goodness. And something can be good or bad according to one diverging standard of excellence. and one standard of good could be competing with another standard of good over here. And that's just the tension of existence. And what is good for us might be really bad for mosquitoes that carry malaria. It's just the way it is. I would like it if human existence was more at odds with the existence of bedbugs, speaking from a couple years of experience in that world. I would like them to go away totally, or at least back to the bat caves from whence they came. But, a sufficiently objective perspective, which is what a lot of these people seem to want in their concept of good. They said whatever is good has to be objectively good, or else it isn't really good.
Right.
And that there is no room within that framework, exempting some very acrobatic intellectual maneuvers, to distinguish the wellness of a human being from the wellness of a bedbug or some other critter. And you see that in a lot of these people. I love dogs as much as the next person, but there's a particular kind of misanthropic person who says dogs are better than humans.
Right.
And like that's right. That feels like the gateway to this kind of broader objective misanthropy that you were talking about.
Yeah, and that's. I would say that misanthropes are just idealists who are disappointed.
Yes.
Yes. Like they're basically, because what they're saying is that people aren't as I wish they would be.
Yeah.
Therefore, people are terrible. But you made up that definition of how you think that they should be. You didn't base it on how humans actually are.
Right.
And so that's a little unfair. I expect humans to behave in the way that they've never demonstrated that they behave at all. Whereas like dogs just love you for existing, and of course you like them better. I mean, I'm not against this. If I had to choose a death, I just want to go to sleep in a pile of dogs. That sounds real nice. I love my dogs. But I just like dogs generally. Yeah. I'll hang out with other people's dogs. But that doesn't mean that they're better than humans. Right. And that doesn't mean that, that I've joked those kind of people are like species traders, basically. Every other species cares about itself. And not necessarily even its whole species, but the individual, because they're not able to think in that kind of way, even though they probably do instinctually, but they're not consciously saying the cause of the pig is mine and mine. That doesn't. No pig is saying that. Yeah. But obviously, they want pigs to survive,
right?
Because that's their pigs.
Now there is an asterisk there, which comes from Mark Zuckerberg of all people, because too far down that line of thought lies the ethno-nationalist crowd, and they're like, oh yeah, keep going. The Mark Zuckerberg line, and what's beautiful about this line is that it was descriptive. It wasn't prescriptive.
Right.
Mark Zuckerberg observed people care 100 times more about the squirrel that died in their neighborhood than they do about 10,000 people dying on the other side of the planet.
Right.
And I think that's not just true, but it would be inhuman to expect people to care more about abstract ideas, really, because that's what 10,000 people on the other side of the world are to you experientially, than to living organisms in your neighborhood. I think it's perfectly normal to love your dog more than you love an unknown stranger. Yeah. Now, legally, I think it's good that we have preferences for the lives of people over the lives of dogs. But like in a combat scenario, I care more about my canine unit than I do about like the enemy. Right. And you see this in like police dog workers, whereas like that dog is not just a companion, but like a coworker and a valued team member. And we really are symbiotic animals there that depend upon each other. And they're a part of our little community. They're a part of our experience of existence and so forth. They're a part of the human story going back however many thousand years. But that doesn't make them human beings. but we have an intertwined relationship.
Right. Absolutely. And so, yeah, massive numbers of people. I mean, I wrote about that in Becoming a Barbarian, obviously, too. And that's, um, you can't care about people that you've never met,
Right.
in a way. And what we have is the media makes us, it encourages us to care about people we don't know, but it's a very select group of people. They've chosen who we're supposed to care about because of how sexy the story is, and how useful it is to their purposes and all that. So it's like, Jimmy could get hit by a car down the street, and you wouldn't know about it because it wouldn't be on the news, because it's being there's some war somewhere or something bigger that you're supposed to care about.
Yeah.
And so it's, yeah, I mean, obviously we can't care about all of humanity at once, but I think that we could all agree that we would like humanity itself to survive.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I've never
Yes.
read your letter to Anwei thing, but like, it seems like it goes into that general direction, because then you're talking about your line and your relatives. And also, I mean, for me, even, I don't have, I'm the end of my line. But it's, I need my ideas to move forward. My legacy is my ideas, and if humans die out, then my ideas die too.
Right.
I mean, I think everyone, even if you don't have kids, you have an interest in human beings continuing, because if you've done any good in the world, or you've done anything that you're proud of and that you want to last, then you want people to be able to appreciate it.
Exactly. The way I try to explain the idea of the Anwei, which is this intergenerational identity, is that it has, I'm probably oversimplifying it, but I try to say there's basically three components. There's the physical material that makes up you. There is there's the form, the blueprint, the instruction manual, so to speak, the DNA, you might say, or the blueprint of a building. And there's the history, the where you've been, where you've come from, and all of these things are shifting over time. And not all of us create ideas. Not all of us genetically move into the future. Not all of us have history that survives, but little bits of all of us move forward and intertwine in all of this. And we aren't just the material, but we're also not just the ideas. And I think that I get to return to the ostensible title question here with humanism, is there's this danger of going into this kind of Marxist notion of thinking of ourselves as a species being, as if we are all a singular organism together. And I don't remember if I included it in the book or not, but one of my favorite proverbs is this Arab saying, it is me against my brother, me and my brother against the family, me and my family against the tribe, me and the tribe against the world. And it captures the tension that exists. So it's like, we're not just competing against meteors and extinction events the way that existential risk nerds like Nick Bostrom want us to. It's like, no, we're competing with each other too. And we at one level, humans and all other mammals are competing with the insects for dominance of the world. At another level, we're competing with other mammals. We kill wolves, and wolves sometimes kill us, and we're also competing with each other. And there's this nested tension in the experience of existence, and humanism, to the degree that it tries to unite us in one singular identity, risks cutting against the actual experience and, in some sense, the actual nature of life, the role we have inherited and inhabit in relation with existence and with each other.
Exactly. And that's why I started talking about zoological humanism, because obviously that is what is known as humanism. We've talked about, and we also looked a lot of things up, and it seems to mostly just be atheism.
Right.
That seems to be
humans the center.
They care most about there not being a God, really. That's but What I meant by zoological humanism is to actually look at human nature and our species as it is, as an animal, rather than as this magical, we can all come together fantasy fairy tale that has nothing to do with the history of the human race, nothing to do with anything that you could study about humans if you would try.
Right.
It's a fantasy. And in the way that it grows out of a lot of overactive empathy and also a lot of blank slate theory, which is, the idea, for those of you who haven't been introduced to that, it's just a way of talking about the idea that humans are unlike any animal that's ever existed, in that somehow we can be magically reprogrammed in any way. And, we have no instincts and no real nature, so to speak. And that's a ridiculous idea, but it was extremely popular, and it's, it folds into humanism, the humanism that you were talking about, because like we can use words to change everything.
Yes.
We can do it, but you can't. I can't use words to grow a new arm. We have limitations of our bodies, and our bodies inform our psychologies. They influence our psychologies, and you don't have to go through and find a gene for everything that you can possibly do, but there is a real influence that your body has on your drives. I mean, obviously there's hormones, there's all kinds of things like that, and you can change those, but changing them also has effects, as we're seeing with many people who are trying to change their hormones too far, and try to become something that they're not. There are limitations on the human body, and a pro-human philosophy, and that's why I was joking calling it a humanist philosophy, a pro-human philosophy that it actually embraces what human beings are as an animal, would say, no, there are limits. This is what we are. I am not a bird. I am not a tree. I'm not a chimpanzee. That's a rhyme. I'm not a bird. I'm not a bee. I'm not a chimpanzee. I'll shout that in the crowd someday. But I can't just be anything. I can only be a male human.
Yeah.
And
the place to shout that is at an otherkin conference. It was a low comment, but yeah, no, absolutely. As far as these constraints and the problem, I feel like with this word humanism and with many words like this, is that it's very easy to fall into false dichotomies and say, well, what is the opposite of a God-centered world? Well, it's a human-centered world. What's the opposite of a human-centered world? Well, it must be a God-centered world. Or you could actually come up with an infinite number of opposite things. We were sort of toying around with it, and I was like, could you do like virtuism? And I don't think that works, because like the virtue, as you pointed out, like the virtues would have to be human specific, because excellence in flight is maybe the virtue of a seagull, but not of a human being. So like that, even that falls back to the human category, but it's not humanity as a whole. And one commentator's take on Heidegger's take on humanism was that when you look at what composes humanity, that inheritance, that not blank slate, what we start with, both from birth and culturally, linguistically, and all this, putting the entire burden of responsibility of shaping who we want to become in the grand sense is actually profoundly dehumanizing, in that it alienates us from the components that we derive our identity from, which include the ideals of objectivity. So it actually becomes self-defeating in a circular manner. But having the foundation be the biology. First of all, I think Aristotle would be quite proud and happy with that. But it just feels so sane. I was talking about this with some of the other guys in the order, might have been in our chat actually, about how to me it seems like maybe 2/3 of marriages could be instantly improved if both husbands and wives were reminded daily that their spouse is a mammal. Just that, just remind them that their spouse is a mammal, and
Yeah.
they're driven and influenced by mammalian inputs, things like illness and hunger and just like all those other basic lowly mammalian things that are very easily overlooked a lot of times. And just remembering that goes, I think Christopher Hitchens actually said something similar when he was reminding people to always remember that was it their politicians or their religious leaders, maybe both, or remember that they're mammals. It's a nice check on excessive trust in those kinds of people.
Yeah, well, I think this kind of human-centered zoological perspective really is grounding. It's people get mad that we're animals, but again, it's like being transgender and being mad that you're like the wrong gender or something like that. It's kind of ridiculous. It's not okay. You're mad that you are what you are, and you have no idea how to be anything else. You have absolutely no experience in the world that would lead you to know what it is to be anything but what you are.
Right.
You can observe things, but you can't. I cannot get into my mind, the mind of my dog over there, who's thankfully stopped chewing on that bone, which is loud. But I mean, I can't understand what it is to be Spike.
Yeah.
And in a way that, like, men who want to be women actually have no idea what that experience from cradle to grave is like.
Right. My wife had a friend whose husband decided he was a woman, and her friend's complaint immediately was, is this how you think we act? Because the guys who transition to women, they're as a general rule, I'm sure this isn't true of all of them, hashtag not all, but like the general rule is that they play these caricatures of the most exaggerated female traits. And it's like, you're playing the part of a woman as perceived by men.
Yes.
It's like your nature actually shapes your perception of the other thing. You can't actually get to that other place. Because you can't even perceive in that way. For philosophy nerds, one of the most popular and famous essays of the last century, really, I think, there's this guy named Thomas Nagel who wrote this paper called, I think it is called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" And it's all about the gap in perception between human beings and bats as it pertains to consciousness and the exploration of the nature of consciousness. And his idea is, we assume it's probably like something to be a bat, but we have no access to what that could possibly be like, not only because we don't echolocate, but because our whole lives and our lifespans and our existence is different, and there's an intractable, unbridgeable gap between the experience of humans and the experience of this conscious experience of bats. And at a much smaller scale, there's probably something similar going on between people and other people, not just men and women, but people who speak one language and people who speak another language.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more commonality, certainly, but there's a big there is I always say, like, a language gap or there's something about Eastern Europeans that's a little bit different. Like that's they're going to come at you in a different way about different things. And it's they'll surprise you with stuff like that you'll just take for granted being like an American. And they'll be pushy sometimes and like be aggressive in unnecessary ways, but it's just a different, and it's like a walk of life thing. I mean, that's a cultural thing, and that's where the argument for so much of this reprogramming stuff comes from. Is they're like, see how people are different. What if we just rewrite the script for everybody?
Yes.
And that's the plan. But again, there are boundaries of what is human. And that's, like I said, as you said, and I said earlier, the idea of everyone on Earth loving one another and not breaking into smaller tribal groups and caring about everyone equally and learning to agree about everything is literally the most inhuman thing that you could possibly ask us to do. It'd be like asking, monkeys to stop picking lice out of each other's hair, or whatever it is that monkeys do because they're monkeys. It's so specific. Obviously, we're trainable to a certain extent, to a great extent. We're very trainable, but there are limits of how much we can be trained and still be flourishing. And that's why I like this idea of zoology in the sense of like, if you were going to put us in a zoo, and that was actually, I brought this up. Someone asked, I just did it, I think, an Instagram thing, so not on here, but about influential books. And this is called The Naked Ape. And I think it's 1969. I mean, it's an old book, but there were a bunch of people. It's basically written by a zoologist about humans, studying them as if he was studying an animal.
Nice.
And like this is what mammals do, and this is why they do this, and and just basically walking his knowledge about primates forward. And it's convincing and written in like very accessible language. It was like a bestseller. It was a big book at the time. And his second book, which I don't think I've ever read that one, his name is Desmond Morris. But his second book was called The Human Zoo. And I'm not sure exactly what that is about. I'd have to go and look it up. But I love this idea of looking at people as if you were going to put us in a zoo tomorrow, if you're going to be humane, if you're going to be humane, which is kind of a funny way to use it, to chimpanzees, you're going to try to figure out what's their habitat like, what makes them aggressive, what makes them not aggressive, what do they need for their communities to work, for their social system. It has a structure. If you do something to it, if you take someone out, you may have to replace with something else or manage that. I'm sure like your Jane Goodalls and all that kind of stuff could tell us all about what that is. Like their whole community and how it's stuck and what kind of food they need. And there's all kinds of things that chimpanzees need so that they just don't go ape shit.
So to speak.
I'm just a thing of dad jokes today. But there's certain, and if to basically make it so like these chimps can be okay in this unideal situation.
Yeah.
And so what would you do? That I think if you're being humane to humans, you would do the same thing. Like what does this species need? What does it always do? And that's why I like evolutionary psychology. The Way of Men was very much based off of evolutionary psychology and the idea that like, okay, what have people been doing? We have so much data. We have thousands and thousands of years of data of what people always do.
Yeah.
And it's like, will they reliably, if you make a big enough group, will they reliably break into smaller groups? Yes. If it, like basic things like that, like, because they want some kind of autonomy and everyone wants to distinguish themselves and whatever. And there are certain ones that are leaders and certain ones that are followers. And there's going to be all these dynamics. And it's not like everyone is exactly the same, but there are patterns. And if we were going to create better, a philosophy for the future, which is kind of what our project is in a way, or a philosophy of the future, not the philosophy for all mankind, because but if we were going to create a philosophy for humans that would better, it would take all these things into account. And religion is actually one of those as well. I mean, do humans create religion? Yes, always. That is not negotiable. And we've seen it obviously with things like, as your James Lindsay would say, the Gnostic woke stuff. All those people are atheists, but yet they're probably more religious than most Christians. Right. And so they will create religious ideals and all those kind of things. They'll do the same things over and over again. So why would you not look at what humans always do and then try and figure out how to work within the confines of your actual species?
Yeah. And not make your philosophy at odds with those things. One of the most amusing works I read in the research for a project I've been working on for the last 6 months was actually a Frankfurt School Marxist work called The Dialectic of Enlightenment by Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer.
Okay.
And it was a very pessimistic work, amusingly, because they were very much attached to the ideal and the goal of the Enlightenment, which involved demystifying the world, breaking ourselves away from mythology.
Mhm.
But the problem they identified was that the Enlightenment itself ossified into its own mythology, and in fact had to do so. And for them, this was this source of pessimism, like, oh gosh, we still want to do this, but we have no idea how it's going to be possible to break free of myth. And it's like the other alternative that someone could read this and take away with is, or we could just embrace myth then. If it's inevitable, then why are you running so hard from who you are? You don't need to be, Simba off in the jungle running away from, your rightful place as a lion in his case, or just a human being, a very complex, tricky mammal. Right. Yeah. He was supposed to be a warrior prince. Come on. Really, supposedly,
Yeah.
like we can just, there's nothing wrong with just embracing, that zoological foundation. And I think people view it as limiting in this very naively grand view of the possibilities that they're losing. And there's so much intricacy and complexity in the possibilities within the constraints of being a human being. As well. One of my favorite contemporary philosophers, Matthew Crawford, wrote a little bit about this in one of his works. I don't remember which one, about how the complex possibilities of music often arise from the limitations of the instruments themselves. No, I think we talked about this in a podcast a long time ago about art. And you said something about how, I'd have to go back, this is from like a year and a half ago, about how, give me a 3 foot by 6 foot canvas, and I can immediately begin talking about competition.
I was going to jump in and say the same thing.
Give me infinite space. You don't know where to start.
Yeah. You need art needs limitations. It needs some like limitations of form,
which is sort of a solution to circle back to the problem of nausea that Jean-Paul Sartre was talking about how the nausea is this dizzying feeling of the infinite possibilities stretching out before us, when we understand the true weight of our responsibility in becoming who we are. And that can actually be a kind of paralytic to many people. But it's like, but the possibilities aren't infinite in the vast sense. Now, they are infinite in the Zeno's paradox limited sense of, within the constraints of humanity, within a chessboard, the number of possible moves are still very close to infinite. And the possible ways you can live your life, the things you can do, the things you can become as a zoological human are still incredibly broad and wide-ranging. And there's still a lot of responsibility there. It's just not lordly responsibility. It's not deific responsibility, if that's the right conjugation for that.
Yeah. I mean, there are people at a level that have a greater responsibility. People who rule nations and whatever. I mean,
Elon Musk
Elon Musk has opportunities to do very big things that could influence things in very big ways. I mean, the average person, how much are they influencing the trajectory of mankind? Probably not a lot.
But why are you trying to? Why is that the goal?
Right. I mean, for every person, that can't be the goal. Most people don't want that kind of responsibility, like you said. That most people, there are a lot of people who don't want to. I mean, the guy I live with doesn't want to be a manager at work because he doesn't want that kind of responsibility. He's supposed to go in and do his shift and go home. It's not everyone wants that on their shoulders, and so and that's very natural again to the human species, that there are going to be people who want to take that on and people who don't. We don't all want to take it on. We're not all trying to be top dog in every single way. I mean, I'm happy to give away lots of things to specialists. That's great. But as a guideline for some of this stuff, one of the other books that I was going to bring up, I bought this just in case it becomes a hate book that I'm not allowed to buy anymore. But this was referenced, and I've used it for years, but I never really bought it until we had started having this discussion recently. It was referenced in The Blank Slate, and it's a book called Human Universals. Probably can't see it, probably not focus, but it's by Donald Lee Brown, and he was skeptical of what he was doing. He felt that he was working through anthropological things, and they try to have a cultural explanation for everything. That's the prime thing. And he's just went through databases of human behaviors and studies and so forth, and found that there are certain things that all human societies do. They will come up with something in this realm that always this is one of them, obviously, that I've used in the past is men always have political power. In every human society that has ever really been successful for any amount of time, that's a human universal. But also, rape is prescribed. You're not, you don't rape within your own community. That's considered bad always.
Right.
Now, whether you raid the other community and rape all their women, that's up for grabs. But
it's like murder. It's there are people who are protected citizens, and then there are outlaws who are outside of the protection of the law.
There's so many things like that. I mean, he goes in to talk about language, and there's certain even things of grammar that they've found that all societies come up with words for certain kinds of things to distinguish this from that. He was talking about colors, everything that humans do always. And in this list of he actually has a chapter in here, which I hadn't read until I bought it recently, but it's a chapter where he describes, he basically throws out everything that he knows 100% for sure. And there are many other things you could probably add, but he does a description of the universal people. If you were to make a universal human, what would that group of people do always? And so it's too long to read because it's 10 pages of summarizing all his research. But I think things like that are a starting place for hey, well, let's make a realistic society based on what we actually are.
Right.
And then, obviously you can say this, then you can make fine line things of what you think is best for right now and in our environment for where we are, but to have this basis based on all human societies that have ever been studied is pretty good data to use. And it just strikes me as very odd that we don't, we know why, we know why we're not using it. But like I said, there was a big push to start talking about humans that way. And it was from the science community. It was from a not religious perspective. It was from a data-driven perspective. These are the things we always do. Here's how we can explain what we are.
Yeah.
And I think that's just it's always been with me as that's how I look at people. And I think that's a solid way to craft a philosophy. What do we always do? And, we always talk about, it comes back to the body, and you talk about it in your essay. And one of the reasons we're talking about this is that Chris has been working on this essay for our book that we're trying to finish up to put out as soon as we can. And it's about solar phenomenology and placing what we're doing here in the history of philosophy. And there's a whole section in that about the importance of the body and how our relationship with our body influences the philosophy that we create and the way that we see the world and so forth. And that's our limitation, And that's, again, one of the things that we found that doesn't work when you ignore the human animal. You get things like the thing that we've talked about a bunch in the group, like, well, encourage women to not have kids until they're 40. Because they encourage them to have their careers and then not have kids until they're 40. Well, that's actually not how the human animal works. That doesn't work out for a lot of people. So that created a generation of probably very sad people who thought they were going to be able to pop out kids at 45. And that's not real for most of them. I mean, there'll be there's anomalies and like rare cases and things where the people just spent tens and tens of thousands of dollars to try and make it happen. But that wasn't a realistic thing to do because we're still the same animal.
Right.
And there's many such cases.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, this sort of goes back to so much of the women going into the workforce and giving up childbirth. There's like a martyr-like quality, and you see this in the queer movement in particular, where we're sacrificing ourselves on the altar of progress in this pursuit of power to transform ourselves into whatever we want to become. And we know it won't work the first time around, and perhaps even not the second or third or fourth time around. But our human sacrifices are experimental attempts at self-transformation, violating these constraints that had chained us down to our biological origins. We can slowly saw away at these chains and unlock godlike powers to become masters of nature, masters of ourselves, to become self-creating animals. And I think the knockdown argument against that, it sort of goes back to what we were talking about before with perception, is that we're perceiving our powers of seeing the world and of thinking are themselves constrained by our subjective nature. And that might be why healthy, strong people who are doing well don't seem to entertain these fantasies in the way that other people might.
Yeah. I mean, you get into a sentiment thing. You're like, I have to destroy the world
Right.
to be happy. I have to remake the world in my own image so that I can be happy. It's always a bad, that's going to create some trouble if you put that person in any kind of power.
Right.
But which is what is happening in many places. Put whatever. I brought this up twice now on two different podcasts, but the whoever that guy who wrote *Sapiens* is.
Oh God, Yuval Noah Harari. Yeah.
Yeah, I like. I want to call him Nosferatu. Yuval Nosferatu, because I mean, dude, it really looks like he's just a hideous little gay man who's like I'm like, don't give that man any kind of power, and don't let him describe the human animal because he does not know what it is. He does not know what it is at its finest point. He's mad about it.
No, and it's worth mentioning here because we were talking about statistics before. People like Yuval Noah Harari and even Steven Pinker, much as I absolutely love his Blank Slate, you can't fully understand the human animal or a given human animal from statistics alone. They can be a fantastic check against really, really bad ideas. And that's like what Steven Pinker did so masterfully in the Blank Slate. He says, your ideas are wrong, and here's the data that shows why it's wrong. Right. And he just I feel whenever that book was published feels like the date that Blank Slateism died. I don't know how any Blank Slate argument can survive that, but you can't take
it survives because you don't actually have to be rational.
Well, right. Going back to human universals, I suppose. But yes. But like these data, you can't construct a positive concept of what a human is from these data. There's this perhaps one of the most amusing stories in all of philosophy. Plato was in the school teaching his students, and they were talking about definitions, and they were talking about what it was to be a human being. And he defined a human being as a featherless biped. And the OG troll of his day, even more so than Socrates. Some people in the chat, I'm sure, already know this, and we should read some of the chats. Diogenes of Sinope comes bursting through the door, holding this still twitching plucked chicken, saying, "Behold Plato's man," and Ecce homo, and is parading up and down with this naked chicken. And it's like the data didn't quite account for that, but
Right.
Thank you, Diogenes, for that very valuable contribution. But he is a wild character, not admirable, but fun. He had his funny moments.
Yeah. Well, trolls are funny sometimes until they're just annoying. Until they're non-productive.
Yeah. He was anti-productive. He was masturbating in public, throwing poop at people. He had his funny moments, like his run-in with Alexander the Great, which was epic. But I mean, if people on this point of universalism, people talk about one of the phrases you might hear among the descendants of the French Enlightenment, the Thomas Paine types and those sorts. It's talking about being citizens of the world.
Yes.
That phrase originated from Diogenes. Oh. He was the first citizen of the world, maybe the first humanist in this sense.
And took it too far. Obviously, he was masturbating in the street, and like, okay, you embrace it, you're human. You over embraced human nature. Too far.
Well, I don't even know if he was embracing. I think he was trying to break it to some degree.
Yeah.
He was doing like sociology 101 student like experiments. You know, the type where the teacher tells all the sociology students to go out and do stupid random things that break people's social norm expectations.
Right.
And it feels so profound. It's like literally the least profound thing you could imagine. But that was what we did that when I was in school. It was like, oh, we're going to lay down in a walkway or some stupid stuff. Yeah. It feels like that was a lot of what he was doing to break people out of their dishonest conflation of custom with objective reality. But there's nothing wrong with custom. There's nothing that custom is a part of who we are, and it's a part of how we live.
Right. And as we said with all these things, there's a degree to which is too far. Right. Like you can put humans at the center of the universe because we would naturally do that because we're humans. But there's a too far. There's a place where it doesn't work anymore.
Right.
Where it's no longer functional. And same thing with like, I think the dream of humanity is we create tools that make us more powerful and better at the things that we can do already. There was a lot of that in the Vervaeke talks. The way we use to think with tools and so forth, and language being a tool. And the dream of I'm sympathetic to a certain degree with the whole like cyborg thing, the cyborg realm of transhumanism to a certain point, because obviously like that's tools.
Right.
We're just making more and more tools to make us better and compete at a higher level.
Yes.
And that's what humans have literally always done. That is in our nature to do that. Like I have eyes, but they can't see in X-ray vision. Of course,
right.
Well, that would be next level.
Well,
that would level me up.
The masculine ideals are always depicted with in armor. They're soldiers. The Spartan phalanx and stuff. What do our modern soldiers look like? They don't have X-ray goggles, but they do have goggles of a certain kind.
Yes.
And that makes them look more badass. It is the ultimate flex in certain communities. If you personally own what are called antlers, which are the quad sights, so you have panoptic vision.
Yeah.
Those things are like $43,000,
Yeah.
plus the other equipment that you need to mount it and the thing on your gun and like all this other stuff.
Right.
That is a big flex. That is they are cyborgs. You know, they've got the
Yeah.
armor, they've got all this crazy electronic equipment that augments their abilities to do things. And you know, perhaps we could delve into this in a future podcast. I don't think we have time now, but it does bring up a question about technology and our relationship with technology.
Yeah.
And I started off the bat with Heidegger. It's something Heidegger had a lot to say about as well. And there's, you know, people like J.R. Tolkien or Heidegger, they don't seem against technology full stop, but there is like we were talking about, there's a place where it goes too far, and it's like the nature of the technology itself. And you get this sense that with transhumanists in particular, where it's no longer about augmenting human aims and interests, but the technology takes on a purpose of itself, of its own, and humans become an impediment to that.
Yeah, and that's the problem there. It's like the making humans be able to do. I mean, there's so much promise that technology offered before it went to this dark place that we're talking about now. I mean, you know, well, like, oh, we could regrow a limb for someone who got hurt in a car accident,
That's
or
how they
we
sell
could,
it to you. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, that's all stuff that like makes sense. You know, like that's like of every, like, would Gilgamesh have signed off on that? Yes. You know, like of course I would. You know, like everyone would do that. Everybody in all of human history would do that, except they'd probably say it was possessed by witches or whatever. But like, it's you would probably, you know, say, oh, would my daughter like to actually have an arm? Yes. You know, most people would do that. And so, yeah, I mean, that's within the realm. Making us superhuman is not. I'm not against that. You know, like there's things that we can do that do that to a certain degree, but also there's unintended consequences to all these things, and especially and that's what I think. I hate the word conservative with the fire of a thousand suns, but there is an argument for slow your roll on certain things, because if you look at what the internet did, I mean, obviously we're talking on the internet right now.
Right.
It's the only reason why we know each other. And, you know, the only reason I know most of my friends, really. But the unintended consequences, okay, well, obviously, like widespread porn, widespread, like the social media and the way it messes up people's brains, and like all the other things that are going on as consequences of these things. And that's why it's sometimes helpful for these things to roll out slowly.
Right.
So you can tweak those things instead. But unfortunately, another thing of human nature is that the way that we compete is at such a level, at such a fast pace, that people are like, they don't want anyone else to beat them. So they'll do things that are foolish just to get ahead, which is why we have atomic bombs. Like,
Right.
you know, like that's,
well, wasn't that the problem with testosterone back in the 80s? Like there's actually nothing wrong with men injecting themselves with testosterone,
right.
Like especially during a time where testosterone levels are on a consistent downhill slope for most men.
Right.
But
Well, they would say that that's unnatural and you should accept your life.
But I mean,
yeah.
well, I mean, there's a question about how natural that is, and anyways, but
right. Yeah.
but like there was a problem with perverse incentives in the power lifting community where it's like if one guy is taking X amount,
oh yeah,
if you take 2X, you can beat him.
Yeah.
And so you have to take an unhealthy quantity in order to even be competitive within these domains.
Right.
If you're doing that, and it can feel like technology is getting that way. I just turned it off because it was distracting. I only have a smartphone because my current employer required an app on a smartphone in order to clock in and clock out. Prior to that, I was using a flip phone. I went to the store and I bought a $30 flip phone, and it was fantastic. It was great. But then I got a new employer, and okay, yeah, I'll make the jump. But and if for some reason I either leave this employer or if they change their policy or how they do clock phone, I will go back to a flip phone or a Nokia brick, because it's great. Is this thing convenient? Is it great to be able to look up, Perseus Project Greek stuff in 3 seconds? Is it great to be able to pull up Wikipedia articles on a whim, or take quick high quality photos and videos of my kids or the weather or projects and then post something I'm struggling with to Instagram and have 5 really knowledgeable friends all give me real-time updates on how to fix that? That is fantastic. That is like fantastic augmentation of our ability. But there are costs too.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And that's like, I've thought about, I haven't done it yet. I have one sitting around. You accumulate phones after a while. And I have an older phone that I use for the drone that I never take out. But I mean, I could plug that in and have that be my app phone, because there's some apps that just don't operate well on the computer. Instagram being one of them. It's difficult to upload in certain ways, especially reels. And have that be my app computer and my app phone, and then walk around with one that doesn't have all that crap on it. Right. Just so it's not just such a mind-numbing thing that's sitting there every time that I have to cook something in the kitchen or whatever. That's one of those things. But that's beyond the scope of our thing, obviously. But obviously, the unintended consequence of the technology are there. Yeah. The only thing I wanted to wrap up with was just, if you really, I think so much of the character and aesthetic of this movement, maybe that's partially my influence, but of solar idealism, it has been, a little bit of a late 60s, early 70s thing, which is just something that I vibe with really hard. But there's also there was a time when our visions of the future were about all the things that we just said, about humans living as they have always lived, but with augmented abilities and augmented technology, like the Jetsons. Like, you're still going to have a mother and a father, and the father's going to go to work, and the mother's going to stay at home. And he has things to do her dishes for her and whatever, and she just has like a little thing to fly her to the store and all that stuff. To do all the things that women do, but she's doing them with like advanced technology. And the same thing, and they have their kids, whatever. Star Trek is the same way. Like, men are still men and women are still women, and we're still the human animals. We're going into space and have the same needs. They're fulfilled by different things, or simulated in many cases. They have simulators and all kinds of things that do things, but it's clear that we still have this. We're still the same animal going out into space and doing the same things.
Right.
Well, we're going to go out and make war with this other group of creatures, the Klingons or whatever. We have to go have conflicts all over and have adventures. And, like I said, there's the romantic interests, all kinds of things, all the things that are very, very human. And it's only like, I think in the past, maybe 30 years, 30 years, that it's shifted more towards something darker than that and away from human. But I think most people are sci-fi visions, like men and women are still men and women, and humans are still humans. We still behave that way. And I think that if we can, that's the futurism that I want. Like, let's go to, we don't have to hate technology or this thing that's become on the right, the right or whatever, the return or whatever. We have to return, never come out of the forest, whatever. Yeah. But that's not what humans
return to monkey. Yeah.
That's not what humans are. That's not what they do. Right. And we need to, recalibrate to what our species actually does zoologically, and then send that into space. Monkeys shot into space. But
that's the end of the meme. It's the return to monkey, and then it jumps to the Russian monkey getting
return to monkey, go to space. Monkey goes to space. Yes, but I mean that's really where we are, just shooting monkeys into space. But it's I think that's the way, like and if we can give that kind of dream more traction and explore that more. And I think that's a good way forward in the future.
Yeah. And I think embracing there's like a tension between laws in a society. I believe it was Nietzsche who wrote about this. It's like laws don't tell you about the nature of a society. Laws tell you the nature of the neighbors of a society. If tribe A drinks a lot, tribe B will have strong laws prohibiting drinking, because that differentiates us from them.
That's like
And
the Old
I think,
Testament. That's the Old Testament.
Right. Differentiating, but I think Nietzsche was tracing it out to like Greece and the Romans and other groups as well. Yeah. And I think, as technology gets more advanced, it will be more important to have, zoological humanistic foundations in our ideals, not in order to have a ground to reject the technology from, but as a sort of island of sanity that we can hold on to and stay tethered to while we use the technology in a slightly safer manner. Like drinking is a very dangerous and probably just overtly bad thing. Nonetheless, many people do it very functionally, and we do it functionally because we have certain cultural standards, like you don't drink and drive, you don't drink before 5 o'clock. Like there are certain expectations that if someone violates, they're a problem, not just legally, but like socially and culturally.
Well, yeah, they're best practices because people have discovered over many years, if you start drinking before 5 o'clock, you're going to start drinking at noon. Yeah, and then you're going to start drinking at 9 a.m. and that's how you get to a very bad place. Right. So they cut off at 5 o'clock. So like that's because that's kind of what people do.
And so like so much of this internet stuff is like, it feels, I think, very pathological because it is so new. Mm-hmm. And like, so all the pathologies just run rampant. But like, I think reminding ourselves of, our zoological human nature and the way that the internet can hack that and break us through that, can give us a sort of position us in a place where we can take the best from the internet and also protect ourselves from the dangers with certain best practices and rules of etiquette and so forth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if there's anything that proves what kind of monkeys we are, it is the internet. And marketing is carnal truth. I've always said that. Like marketing they will find a way to make the monkey do the thing, and it knows what the monkey wants. And like my Explore feed is like, no one should ever see that. Like what did I click on? What did I click on? Oh, it's fun. I'm like, I gotta figure out how to clean that out. But there's stuff like that. I mean, it knows what does the monkey want. Like it'll find, and they're looking for that. That's what marketers do. So it's one of the things. But I think where we came down to in this, so we can wrap it up, is that one of the slogans for the Order of Fire has been, and it worked in our rituals and so forth, is "Born of the Earth, reaching forever upward," and that stuck with me when I wrote it, because that acknowledges that Lord of the Earth side, that we are tethered to the Earth. We come from the Earth. Even if we were, recolonized Mars or whatever, we are tethered to this thing, this animal that came from.
We're tethered to our biological history, no matter what planet we're on.
Exactly. And so we are tethered to that, and that is part of what we are. And we can't escape that because we don't know even what that means. As you've said earlier with bats and whatever, like, what does it mean to not be that? We have no idea. And it's probably bad because we don't know how to process it, or because our brains will be the same. But, so I like that, like reaching forever upwards, but we're still tethered to what we actually are.
Yeah. And the fact that we're tethered gives us something to strive upward toward. Like this goes back to, not to bring abstract philosophy back into it, but this old problem in Christian theology, and you hear it from Muslims too, is God must be unchanging because he is perfect. And I think this is even a Platonic dialogue. If a perfect being changed, it would necessarily be less perfect. So this of course, I don't know whether that's a problem or not in a changing world, in a changing environment where perfection is not just an innate quality, but the status of a relationship between the thing and its environment. But regardless, there's always something to strive for, which I think makes life a lot better than, there's nothing more like deflating than being in some competitive pool and then reaching the top and becoming the best. And you're like, well, now what?
And that is the most human. Again, that's one of the most human things in the world, because if Mr. Smith from the Matrix were to hear that, he would say, "You are so ridiculous right now."
Yeah, that's like a great scene.
Yeah. Oh, you've reached the top and you're still not satisfied. What is wrong with you? But that is part of being human. And so if you don't factor that in, you're going to create a lot of trouble. And that's what they've talked about with, when AI comes around or whatever, and it starts putting people out of work. It's like, well, if you can give them money, but they have to have purpose. They don't know how to not have. Yeah, if you don't have to go to work, why would you? Because no one would choose to go work at 7-Eleven. I mean, you and I might choose. I would still write because I can't not. And I would still try to do creative things because that's super fun. I mean, I made that little intro for no reason. No one cares.
That was awesome. That was super cool.
I thought it was cool. There was an hour of this today. I'm like, what if I do this? And I had so much fun doing that. I can't not do that. But like, there's a lot of things that get done in the world that no one would do on purpose, and why? And then what do these people do all day? And then what do they become? Do they just play video games? Do they just what do they just substance abuse? It's like what happens? That's a big human problem, and if you don't deal with the human animal, then it's gonna be messy. So anyway, I think we can wrap it up there. I'm sure you have to go soon, and thank you everybody who has been listening to this. I think it was a good podcast, and I like that we're digging into, I think, maybe some things that maybe other people aren't talking about, or taking them from a different angle, and I'm really enjoying that. And anyway, if you like this, we're doing this every Thursday now, and we will continue to do it until we decide not to.
Yeah, but, like, comment, and if you think it's valuable,
yes,
it doesn't hurt to share it with other people, because it does seem like a lot of people do prefer long form stuff. This is the good part of the internet. These long form. It's why Joe Rogan got the following he has, because he brings on interesting people to have interesting conversations. Not these short, crappy TikTok things that melt your brain for the CCP or whatever. Not that you can't do short form stuff, but that's for the most part, it brings people to the more valuable long form stuff.
Hopefully that's the purpose of it. Because it is hard to say something smart in 15 seconds.
It might be impossible, actually. It might be impossible. But you can give people the impression of having learned something. The internet is full of feeding the addiction of feeling like you're learning something without retaining or learning anything, unfortunately. But
exactly.
Conversation for another time. Sorry.
All right. Well, thanks for everybody for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel. We actually got over 1,000 followers, so we're actually moving on up in internet land here on this channel. So thank you very much, and stay solar.
Pater is the cultural arm of the Order of Fire. For more, visit PH2.